Before we begin, may I request that all mobile phones be placed on silent or airplane mode? May I request the distinguished speaker and Ambassador Saran to come to the dais, please? Good evening, distinguished guests, members of the India International Center, members of the diplomatic community, scholars, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. It's my privilege to welcome you to this evening's program, which primarily focuses on multilateralism and the future of AI. Of course, you can see the title over there. We meet at a moment when artificial intelligence is no longer an emerging technology. It's a structural force reshaping power, productivity, security, and knowledge. It is altering how states govern, how markets compete, and how societies define opportunity and risk. The central question before us is therefore not technological, it is institutional. Can multilateralism evolve to guide intelligence that is borderless, rapidly advancing, and strategically consequential? Can global cooperation ensure that innovation serves equity, stability, and the global public good? This issue is not whether AI will shape the future, it is who will shape the governance of AI. That's why today's conversation carries unusual significance. It's therefore both timely and consequential that we are joined by a global leader who stands at the very center of these deliberations. Dr. Amandeep Singh Gill serves as the Under-Secretary General of the United Nations and the UN Secretary General's Envoy on Technology. In this role, he leads the United Nations engagement on emerging technologies from artificial intelligence and digital governance to global digital cooperation, and has been closely involved in advancing the vision of the Global Digital Compact. Prior to this, he represented India as ambassador and permanent representative to the Conference on Disarmament in Geneva, where he chaired the group of governmental experts on lethal autonomous weapons system, a domain where AI, ethics, and international security intersect in their most appropriate form. Dr. Gill brings to this global conversation diplomatic depth, technological foresight, and normative clarity, qualities indispensable at a time when innovation is accelerating faster than governance structures can adapt. We are privileged to welcome him to the Indian International Center this evening. To formally welcome our distinguished speaker and to set the context from the perspective of the center, may I now invite Shri Shyam Saran, President of the India International Center, to deliver the welcome address. Shri Saran's distinguished diplomatic career, including his service as Foreign Secretary of India, lends profound perspective to the theme of multilateralism and global governance. Sir, may I request you to kindly also felicitate Dr. Amandeep Gill and thereafter deliver the welcome address. Thank you, sir. Over to you for your welcome remarks.
Good evening and a very warm welcome to all of you. I know it has been very challenging to get to this venue because there is a lot of traffic disruption because of the AI summit. That is one problem AI has not been able to solve so far. It is a signal pleasure for me personally and for IIC to be able to welcome once again in our midst Amandeep Gill, who is the UN Secretary General's Special Envoy on Technology, and someone who has been very deeply sort of involved in all the kind of multilateral approaches that are being explored under the aegis of the United Nations. Um, we are also very happy to welcome him here because he has come here precisely at the time when there is a very important AI summit which is taking place here in Delhi. And he will be playing a very critical role in this particular summit. We have some very important people who are participating, including the Secretary General, I believe, of the United Nations itself. So it is particularly, I think, appropriate that he will be at this just when the AI summit is being inaugurated, that he will be able to share some perspectives from his side with regard to the whole challenge of AI. Let me say that this is not a very good time for multilateralism. Multilateral approaches, in a sense, are being sidelined. Many of you might have heard the remarks of the US Secretary of State in Munich at the Munich Security Conference recently, where he essentially wrote off the United Nations and multilateralism, and basically said that whatever challenges we are facing now, it will be almost inevitably outside the UN system, outside multilateralism. So at a time when we are facing, paradoxically, challenges which are cross-border in nature, challenges which have a global dimension, and to which answers can only be found through global collaborative action. Precisely at that time, we find that the world is moving in the opposite direction. None of these problems, whether it is climate change or whether it's the challenge of AI, even things like terrorism, nuclear proliferation, the last standing, agreement between the US and Russia on strategic arms has just expired and there is nothing in its place. So the whole space has now become completely ungoverned. So more and more spaces are actually becoming ungoverned, and sometimes may even become ungovernable. So this is a particularly challenging time, and in this kind of a environment, what the UN still can do to deal with these issues, which are of particular importance to developing countries. We have been talking about in the past of a digital divide. Are we now going to have an AI divide as well? I think, Amandeep, you yourself have talked about the risks of that kind of the developing countries only becoming consumers, not really being able to participate in this development of AI. So those are the kind of challenges which are there before the United Nations. Amandeep has himself done pioneering work in this respect, because we have the global compact, I think, on digital technology, which was essentially a lot of the work was done by him, and it has been accepted by consensus. So that's an encouraging sign, but I think the pace of change is so rapid, and the effort at regulation is so much behind this pace of development, that I think the challenge is becoming even more and more difficult to deal with. So with those words, may I now request Amandeep to give his remarks, after which I will sit down together with him and raise a few questions, and perhaps also have opportunity to answer some of your questions. So Amandeep, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, sir, Ambassador Shyam Saran. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be back at the ISE, and I promise this time not to collapse in the middle of my remarks. So we meet at a very important time. There is a summit that's being hosted by Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi jointly with President Macron. And as Ambassador Shyam Saran mentioned, the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres will be here to attend the summit, just like he's attended the previous 3 summits in this series. So obviously, if leaders are coming together to address one issue, not a G7, G20 type summit where you have a number of issues on the agenda, it's a subject-specific summit. So obviously, this is a subject that's of tremendous importance to the world today. So I want to share with you some reflections, and I want to start with this notion of multiple futures. In code, in software code, there are moments when software development forks. The future of AI is often presented in those terms. A fork, a binary choice between dystopia and utopia. I believe that this is a false choice. There are multiple futures in AI out there, and we can shape them today with our decisions. So we have agency over these multiple futures. And obviously, Ambassador Shamson, you mentioned some political developments. Power will be a factor in navigating this multiverse of AI, as it has been in the past with structural choices about finance, technology, and economics. And this is precisely where multilateralism comes in to temper power with norms and to uphold agency and equity. Think back to open source code. Any smart coder can direct development onto a new branch. In the same way, our choices as countries, as communities, will make a difference. And let's hold this thought of agency, of multiple futures, power constraints, and multilateral cooperation as we explore further. Now, I want to start by making sure that we have roughly a similar understanding of what AI is. Much of what we have in our heads comes from Hollywood notions of killer robots or conscious synths, from breathless media reporting and social media influences of all shades. And the term itself is not very helpful. It's almost a quirk which was leveraged to get funding for a conference. And given our incomplete understanding of what natural intelligence is, for us to talk about something being artificially intelligent is confusing. And we are not even talking about consciousness, which is a whole different ball game. So for better or for worse, this term has stuck. At least let's clear the mind before we dive in. Now, this is a very rough way of thinking about what AI is. You have AI bringing together data and desired outcomes together to create models. And those models then take future data inputs, spot statistical patterns related to those outcomes, and produce outputs that approximate human perception, reasoning, and action. Note that these are statistical patterns. They may have nothing to do with how humans actually perceive. Here is a quick example. So you have this image of an osprey landing on a nest, and AI has been trained on millions of such images, and good wildlife photography is all about sharp focus and blurred backgrounds. Here, often AI confuses the second picture for the first one. And this is the idiot part of the idiot summer that we saw at the introduction of this section. So there's no machine that's actually seeing an animal, seeing. It is a statistical connection that's made with the training data set. and I want us to be clear about this. The idea of desired outcomes is also important. It matters because it underlines that this technology, like other technologies, is a human artifact. It's not dropped from somewhere in the heavens. So it's socially determined. Now, to illustrate this, let's take a simple analogy. If old-fashioned code was about making sandwiches from ingredients as per a recipe, AI is about taking desirable sandwiches as training data to create a model which then takes whatever ingredients you presented and infers a recipe. So, not yet a real chef, as you can see, but very powerful in its brute force simplicity. And so, I want to now come to the savant aspect of this idiot savant. So, large language models like Gemini, Claude, ChatGPT, trained for months on vast compute with internet scale data, text, audio, video, transcribed to text, software libraries, they can now be deployed as agents, harnessed to smaller models for niche tasks, or calling themselves recursively to work through multi-step problems. They not only write excellent code, but have climbed the abstraction ladder to pull in requirements and manage entire software projects. In the software industry, people are talking of a SaaSpocalypse, and you will see repeated periodic panics in other white collar vocations. And this acceleration of capabilities is impressive. As you see this chart, about a year ago, an AI agent could work roughly 10 minutes on a real world task autonomously. Now it is many hours, and soon it could be days and weeks, which gets literally to the point of replacing human experts with virtual workers. So, ladies and gentlemen, the evidence is clear. This is a general purpose technology, another GPT, possibly on steroids. And why do I use this caveat? It's because comparisons with previous general purpose technologies like steam, electricity, and computers from previous three industrial revolutions might just blind us to some of the power of this shift. So they might just be comforting hindsight, whereas we need to deal with this beast from a more, let's say, nuanced perspective. That said, some of the lessons from earlier industrial revolutions are very valuable. In particular, historians like Jeffrey Ding have made the case for diffusion, that in the previous general purpose technology turns, even though France had more innovations when the steam engine came in, but England bested France because it diffused the technology faster. It adapted it for real world applications much faster. So there was more rapid diffusion, enabled by the socio-economic culture of England at that time, artisanal work, apprenticeships, and so on. Similarly, Germany had the better chemistry, but it was the US that pushed more chemical engineers out of its universities and adopted chemistry, chemical engineering into industrial processes faster. And Japan missed a trick when it couldn't turn its advantage on computers and hardware into software. And Tokyo University took many, many years after Stanford University had its computer science degrees. So this kind of offers hope for countries that are currently on the wrong side of the AI divide. Now, in this part of my talk, I want to speak to this AI policy trilemma. And this is opportunities, risks, and readiness. And in fact, good governance, and the way we understand it at the UN, is about all those three. Can't be just about the opportunities, and there are exciting opportunities. Can't just be about the risks, many risks and challenges. It also has to be about readiness, about capacity to respond to, harness those opportunities and tackle those risks. And obviously, there are some uh, exciting opportunities first, and I want us to think a little bit about one where the evidence is quite clear, and this is accelerating scientific discovery. The 2024 Nobel Prize, AlphaFold, material science, AI forecasting. Here is an example of a model, but there are other models. There's a Caltech model that has become very good at accurate predictions, faster predictions. So this is the opportunity side, and it's not just accelerating science, but it's also raising productivity and economic growth, improving government services, raising agricultural productivity, public health, education, tackling climate change. But I just want us to remember that none of this is going to happen automatically. It's not that some labs are developing very advanced AI and somehow automatically that'll translate into higher agricultural productivity, etc. So you need to focus on some enablers. And here I am giving you one example of an enabler, that's compute. And compute today is distributed in a highly inequitable way. All of Africa, this is last year, less than 1,000 GPUs. A single Chinese university, not one of the leading AI universities, Fudan University, 1,200. And Meta, one company alone, 600,000 GPUs. So you see, there's the digital divide, and now there's the data divide, and now you have a huge AI divide. And I'm only speaking about the compute side of the equation. And I have another slide to show you, because we are in India, and India has a very proud tradition of IT development, software development. So single AI startup in the Bay Area, Anthropic, compare that with the top 7 Indian IT companies, and pay attention to the number below in terms of employees. So this divide is real, and in fact, when we look at the risks, the biggest risk is this divide. This, people speak of a K-shaped economy, a K-shaped society, where you have the architects of cognition at one level and the rest of us who inhabit those architected spaces. So this is one of the big risks in AI development. So there are known risks, reality distortion, in the political space, misinformation, disinformation, but also in the personal space where, in the Indian culture, you speak of Maya, the great delusion, which kind of puts a veil over what is real and what is not real. So this is, in fact, descending another veil on reality. Because if all your relationships, interactions are synthetic, then how do you tell what is real and what is not real? As you have the internet flooded with synthetic data, what happens to that perception? And this is an example of the bias and the exclusion and the lack of diversity in data sets. You put in these image generators, tell me about a middle class home in Africa, and it gives you that image, which has nothing to do with the reality in Nairobi or Kigali today. And then this is a big one, and this is a power shift. So power is shifting to private sector actors, so this is not only what's happening across borders, but within societies also. Power is shifting in ways which force us to think. Planners need to think about rapid shifts in labor markets and the productivity gains that accrue only to a few, and gains that may not even generate the revenue needed to support reskilling and the refreshing of social contracts. And then from these known risks, we move to some emerging risks that we need to keep under watch. Impact on social interactions, cognitive decline, deceptive behavior by AI agents, and then there are unknowable risks given the uncertainty of technological development. The famous or infamous, depending on your perspective, debate about AGI or loss of human control fits in that space. Now, before I turn to the last part of my talk on multilateralism, we must confront this twin pacing problem, which is one of those ones to keep us up at night if we are not doom scrolling. So, our institutional capacity and our personal capacity is lagging behind the power of this shift. And this kind of quote captures that pacing problem. So, at a personal level, I use AI tools. Um, and some of them are quite helpful. It's like having an intelligent research assistant at your command that can call 24/7. I feel excited and optimistic about AI's positive potential. But when I put on my diplomatic and policy hat or turban, I worry about gaps in governance and capacity and a competitive geopolitical landscape that complicates collaborative efforts to govern powerful technologies. So now I come to the last part of my talk. So at the United Nations, AI is featuring increasingly across our three pillars: peace and security, human rights, and sustainable development. And despite the challenges to multilateralism, the UN's unique strengths are there: universal participation, convening power, interface with critical application areas such as weapon systems, health, agriculture, and most importantly, a bedrock of norms that has been built over decades. And the Charter, the treaties on human rights and environment, etc., all of these make the UN an ideal platform. UN stewardship of the Sustainable Development Goals positions it to influence AI's trajectory away from destructive competition and towards diffusion and real world impact. So, what's been the evidence on the multilateral effort on AI? I present to you that there's been clear momentum since 2023. Ahead of the first AI summit at Bletchley Park in October 2023, the Secretary General established a high level advisory body on AI with 39 diverse and highly qualified experts. And working with remarkable speed and diligence, they identified key functions that are needed at the international level to complement national and private sector level, industry level governance. And their recommendations rested on a thorough gap analysis, two global surveys on risks and opportunities, and close to 20 expert deep dives. And let me group these recommendations into four big ones. One is common understanding through an international scientific panel on AI for regular science-based, evidence-based assessments of the technology and its implications, so that the policy making everywhere doesn't happen in the dark. Second, common ground, which through a regular policy dialogue on AI governance to knit national, regional, and private sector initiatives together and avoid a fractured governance landscape. Plus, an international AI standards exchange for interoperability so that private sector companies and small enterprises in the global south can benefit from an open innovation landscape. And then third, importantly, common benefits: a capacity development network, a global fund for AI supported by public and private contributions, and an international data framework that creates AI value closer to where data is, thus greatly benefiting developing countries. And finally, common effort: a small, dynamic, and agile UN AI office reporting directly to the Secretary General and working closely with relevant UN agencies and partners. Now, how are we doing on these recommendations? So we were fortunate that these recommendations came close to the final stages of an intergovernmental negotiation process, the Global Digital Compact, adopted by heads of state at the Summit of the Future in September 2024, who embedded AI governance into a larger framework. These frameworks, these negotiations were the adoption by consensus. These were supported by two other resolutions, one championed by the US, the other one by China, on safe, secure, and trustworthy AI for sustainable development and capacity building. So it was a good moment, all these efforts coming together for these principles to be turned into action. These are the three pillars in terms of the actions that followed from the Global Digital Compact across science, policy, and capacity. If you look at the first one, science, last week the General Assembly approved 40 experts from around the world to constitute an independent international scientific panel, including an eminent expert from India, Professor Bala Ravindran from IIT Madras. So they will provide independent insights into opportunities, risks, and impacts. And as the SG has said, the panel will be the world's early warning system and evidence engine, helping us to separate signal from noise and foresight from fear. It'll help us all in the international community anticipate challenges, make informed decisions, and level the information playing field for policymakers worldwide. And on policy, for the first time, we will have a dialogue at which every country will have a seat at the table. This will happen in July in Geneva and then in 2027 in New York, and it'll complement existing efforts, including this week's summit in India, and provide an inclusive, stable home for governance coordination. And it will consider the scientific panel's first report. So we have a short runway of a few months for the scientific panel to produce its inaugural report. Now, governance without capacity would be hollow. So in this trilemma, opportunities, risks, and readiness, the third aspect is very important. Capacity to govern, capacity to also harness the opportunities and manage the risks. So the Secretary General was asked by the Compact, the Global Digital Compact, to produce some options, produce a report. So he has in that report proposed a global fund on AI of up to $3 billion for urgent investments in the 80 to 90 countries lacking the minimum irreducible national capacity across compute, data, talent, and policy frameworks. And I don't have to tell you, this may look like a big amount, but this is less than 1% of the spend on infrastructure in just one country, AI infrastructure last year. And this is what, sorry, I skipped a slide. And this capacity development will allow these 80 to 90 countries not to develop leading frontier models, but to at least land open source models in their own context and come up with their own language data sets, their own applications that address the local problems that they face. The Secretary General's report also presented an option of a network of centers for exchange and cooperation to pool in-kind resources. As you know, peer-to-peer learning is often very effective in accelerating progress on capacity. And it's very encouraging that member states have stepped forward and shown interest. Brazil, China, Ethiopia, Guinea, India, Kazakhstan, Kenya, Rwanda, Saudi Arabia, Senegal, South Africa, Trinidad and Tobago, and Vietnam. From the inaugural meeting that was hosted by Kenya and Saudi Arabia last year in September, to a workshop at IIT Madras in November, and to another workshop that happened last month in Senegal, Dakar, This network of centers has consolidated itself, made quick progress on a cooperation framework for this global network, and this work has been supported by the United Nations. So let me close by saying how critical these three pillars of science, policy, and capacity are to providing clarity for action, building interoperability and trust, reducing inequalities, and accelerating sustainable development. AI futures may be uncertain, but these building blocks are, in the Secretary General's words, multilateralism at its best: agile, inclusive, and anchored in shared responsibility. For AI to do what we hope it will do and to avoid what many fear it could do, it must be governed for and by all of humanity. AI is too important and the stakes too high to rely only on market forces and a fragmented patchwork of national and minilateral action. The United Nations can be the central channel to ensure global buy in for a governance regime that protects and empowers us all, one that distributes opportunities more fairly and does not load risks onto the most vulnerable or pass them on to future generations, as we have seen tragically with climate change. We made a decent start. Let's build on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gill, for a deeply insightful and forward-looking address. You have invited us to reflect on not only on the governance of technology, but on the governance of humanity's technological future, a responsibility that demands foresight, cooperation, and ethical commitment. We now have the discussion, and I request Ambassador Saran to moderate the discussion, followed by the Q&A from the floor. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Amandeep, for a very illuminating lecture, I would say. You have managed to decode for us this very mysterious kind of force which is supposed to be taking over the whole world. But we are somewhat reassured by what you have had to say. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
So, you know, two things which you have been very closely associated with in terms of the UN role in AI. One is the Global Digital Compact, and the other is the subsequent setting up of this international panel of scientists in AI to give you the best that science can offer in terms of assessing both the development of this technology as well as its implications and risks as well. It has at least worked quite well in sensitizing, you know, this kind of mechanism, which is I presume the model is the IPCC on Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It seems to be structured on the same model. And the IPCC at least has worked to provide and sensitize people across the world to the dangers of climate change and our inability to deal with, you know, the fossil fuel economy not being adjusted fast enough for us to avoid catastrophic consequences. So one question is, as far as this Global Digital Compact is concerned, how much of a buy-in do you see from the two major actors as far as AI is concerned? One is the United States of America and the other is China. Because they are far ahead, it seems to me, than many others. If that is the case, unless we have some degree of buy-in from these two major actors, how can we see, you know, whether or not this Global Digital Compact can work? And forgive me for sounding somewhat pessimistic. All that I have seen so far of the behavior of the two major actors doesn't sort of encourage me to think that actually even a minimal degree of buy-in is actually likely from these two actors.
That, in some ways, is a very accurate depiction of our messy reality. But I think the others, we should not take away agency in any manner from other countries, the 191 other member states of the United Nations. And what I have seen in the past few years, I mean, 2024 was a good time when everyone came together, including these two major actors in AI, to support the adoption of the Global Digital Compact. And since then, you see, even though there's been major policy changes in the United States, but you see interest, continued interest, for example, in the panel from major private sector players within the country. So when I travel to the Silicon Valley, meet with the private industry leaders, they appreciate the work that's been done at the UN. And in particular, they think the capacity development work will help diffuse AI faster, will build talent in geographies like Africa, which the industry will need in the future, and will kind of stabilize the market for compute models and so on over a period of time. Otherwise, you'll see a spike and then a crash. So I see that nuanced support from the private sector. They also understand the importance of the science panel, which, by the way, is IPCC-like, but different in the sense because there you had 193 members. Here it's a smaller membership, rapid iteration of the reporting, so kind of adapted for the AI challenge. They see the panel's work as important for clarifying what's the risk floor and the dialogue for reinforcing interoperability. So even though we have these new political challenges, there's a turn in sense of support for multilateralism. I think for all these reasons, I would be more optimistic about the future of these mechanisms. And let's be clear that these are very modest responses to a very significant challenge. This response could have been more ambitious. So it's not, in a sense, it's a non-threatening multilateral value add, which we should be able to work.
I was interested in what you said about some degree of buy-in from the private players, because the sense that I have is that certainly in the United States today, in fact, the trend is towards removing even the kind of restraints which had been put in place earlier. And in fact, there is a tremendous amount of, when we talk to the Europeans, they say that there is a tremendous amount of pressure on them to actually remove even the existing restraints that have been put in, any kind of AI regulation, which usually the Europeans are a little ahead of others in terms of, these governance issues. And as part and parcel of the trade negotiations between the US and Europe, one of the sticking points is precisely this regulation that the Europeans have in place. I'm sure that even we would face those similar kind of pressures in terms of whether or not we have any kind of governance mechanism in place, which may restrict the room for maneuver of most of these very large companies. Now here the dilemma is that the knowledge, the capacity is with the private sector, not with the states. And therefore, any kind of regulation that you are thinking in terms of cannot, in this context, take place without the participation, without the cooperation of the major private players. This is very different from, say, the nuclear issue, where the capacity was mainly with the state. Or even if you take, for example, later on, moving away from nuclear to space, there the capacity was, for example, NASA was the state player. That has dramatically changed. Today, the state is far behind in terms of capacity compared to the private players. Now, in that kind of a scenario, and where it is a competitive space for the private sector, the sort of drive is towards actually doing less and less regulation rather than doing more regulation. And that seems to be the reality. So if this is the kind of dynamics in this sector, how do we solve this kind of paradox, that you need the same people who are actually creating more and more risk are the people whom you are trying to bring in to try and regulate and govern this space.
So, the private sector relies on public trust for the adoption of these technologies. So, if we are typing in prompts and trusting those prompts to result in reliable, useful information, the and then continue paying, uh, very impressive sums of money for those services, the private sector has to ensure that there is safety, there is trusted output, and there's no harm. So I think, I would be careful in somehow politically assessing that the private sector doesn't want any regulation at all. I think it wants smart regulation. It wants government facilitation. Everywhere I see, they want, and when government comes in, obviously there is a notion of public interests. So we may have different interpretations of what that public interest is, depending on political cycles and so on. But I think the smarter players, and you see this in this kind of internal civil war that's happening among the private companies, Super Bowl ads and so on. So some of the smarter players are leveraging their apparently higher trust or their kind of greater investments in safety and reliability for attracting more customers. I think that's a good race to run. I think at the UN, in multilateral spaces, we have to be smart enough to engage these players, like we did with the high-level advisory body on AI, and now even with the scientific panel, you have experts who've been associated with or are working in the labs of these companies to get the assessments, because they are often, as you said, they have the capacity, they have the best scientists, they can pay them lots of money to pull them away from universities. So we need to engage them to get to know what's happening there. At the same time, feed back some of the multidisciplinary perspectives into what their workings are. And it's interesting to see one of the leading labs in the Bay Area has now a chief economist, so who's looking at the macroeconomic implications, productivity, labor markets, GDP growth, but also the microeconomic, the friction in adoption in industry, etc. So these companies will be forced into more of a multidisciplinary perspective through which, the governance perspectives will come in. As they expand their presence in different countries, they'll be forced to face different cultural, linguistic, political contexts where there's sensitivity, for example, to harm being done to children. Take Australia's example in terms of a ban on access to social media for children below a certain age. So I think we have to work this kind of a differentiated, fast-moving landscape to keep building up shared understandings on what works well: smart regulation, good governance, safety, trust, and reliability. And even in places where this approach of no regulation resonates, say in many parts of Asia, we need to experiment first with this technology and then we'll see. I think even there you see now India has the DPDP Act. So I would take data governance to be part of AI governance. So there's a law-based approach there. So Korea, Japan, Vietnam, they have this chapter on AI within their broader omnibus law on digital technology. So I think people are bringing together these local perspectives, local public interest assessments into how they govern these technologies. Not everyone is taking the same approach, but I think this is where the UN is helpful. Like we don't have an agenda. We are not saying everyone should have an AI Act. No top-down agenda. So it's just come together and share what you are trying, so that we keep distilling the best lessons and layering them up as shared understandings building common ground through standards that reinforce interoperability, avoid those gaps in governance.
Yeah. Well, good luck to you, because a record so far. I don't want to belabor this point, but if I take, for example, social media, the business model is precisely that you have to get more clicks, and it is a fact that hate gets much more clicks than any positive sentiment. And that is how social media has become so large. It has become very profitable, but it has become also so destructive that a country like Australia has taken the action that it has. So it seems to me that we are facing a bigger issue here, precisely because the business dynamics is somewhat different from the dynamics which is really puts a greater emphasis on safety, greater emphasis on protecting children, for example, from harm. But if through the UN we are able to get some buy-in from the big players, I think that would be a great achievement that you that you would get. So that's certainly something which worries me a bit. A last question I would like to ask is, since the AI summit is taking place here in Delhi, and you are a major participant in that. I find that the theme of the conference is, I think, three. I'm not quite sure what it's. Yeah, the
Seven
three
chakras.
sutras and the seven chakras. That is the theme of the conference, and so in terms of what we expect from this particular summit, given the way in which we have, as India, framed this, what would be a good outcome from this summit?
And I think, before I get to that point, the seven chakras, the three sutras, there was a point in the slides about the pacing problems, which is not just institutional capacity lagging, but also individual capacity lacking. So these harms, these kind of, the veil of delusion that's falling on all of us, I think that also requires us as individuals, communities, families to be more active in how we use these tools, how our children use these tools, and what kind of time they spend in the virtual world. So I think those are like broader challenges where the UN can bring some of the concerns out clearly, but the action would have to be assumed by at many levels. Now, on the summit itself, I think the planning, the preparation has been excellent, outstanding. The participation this week looks like, again, it's very impressive participation. First time this kind of a summit is happening in a country in the global south. And we do expect that there will be a greater awareness, political awareness of this kind of a comprehensive approach that's needed for the governance of AI for all of humanity. The trilemma, the opportunities, the risks, and the readiness, I hope that kind of becomes more of a political consensus through the work of the leaders at the summit. And also the focus on impact. It's the AI Impact Summit. Impact can only come if we direct action at the right problems and we develop technology to support that action. So, for example, there's a lot of emphasis on large language models. There's tremendous scope for small language models that are more conservative of energy use, that can be tuned in context, that can sit on edge devices, work in low bandwidth kind of scenarios. And I see many Indian startups and startups, of course, in many other parts of the world, taking that challenge up, improving logistics. Warehousing is a big bottleneck in a fast-growing economy like India. Using AI for discovering warehousing capacity and matching it with need was a very successful startup there. There's a startup from my hometown that is using AI and IoTs to assess agriculture output for quality, and has clients like Nestle and others. Another startup that is using AI to help companies manage their intellectual property. So this is really impact in a sense in terms of social and economic transformation. So if the summit can advance this agenda, obviously we at the UN will benefit immensely from the perspective of meeting the 2030 agenda goals, the progress on the 17 SDGs. And finally, I would say, I think this political orchestration at the leaders level can sometimes, run out of steam. Saw that with the nuclear security summits, 4 summits after that, was wrapped up, and then discussion moved to the IEA. So I hope this summit kind of provides a bridge to the first Universal Global Dialogue that happens in July this year. And so in a sense becomes like the minilaterals complementing the multilateral effort. It's a very uncertain time, and there you need to kind of put your bets on several options, and I think multilateralism should be one of those options. In fact, one of the main options as we navigate this transition.
Okay, thank you. So we have a little bit of time still left. So if there are any questions, please ask your question, not a comment. Please identify yourself, and I will take 3 questions together if it's okay, and then we can take another round. Yes, please.
Thank you, sir. So my name is Dr. Bhavleen Kaur Rekhi. I'm a professor of digital marketing and artificial intelligence. Sir, my question to you is that we spoke about the data divide and the GPU divide, etc. My concern here is the governance divide, because you spoke about the K-shaped economy. So my concern is, sir, who is actually responsible for making the regulatory policies? Because if it is, the 3 major players, which is, America and China and European Union, then the South globe, the global South, gets kind of no advantage in terms of participating in the regulatory discussions and arguments, and they merely become the consumers of artificial intelligence. Now, why I'm so concerned about this is because according to the latest data, globally 70% of startups, they are relying on AI, and particularly in India 77%. And if we take SaaS, service software as a service, it's more than 90%. But if the regulatory powers and policy making is only in the hands of few powerful ones, then what happens to the global South, particularly India? Because I see it as a bridge between global South as well as the West. So how do we take care of that, sir?
Okay. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah. Yeah,
Hello, sir. My name is Rishi Prasad. I'm working on an AI startup. My question is, I'm a bit concerned about, if you see how most technologies have been developed by DARPA and other defense organizations, what is to prevent, or what would the panel do in this situation where one of these countries decides actually, that we're not going to release any more open source models, or, they just shut it down? Even at the university level, some of the research that's happening, there is a possibility that this is already happening, right? So there's already, one of the comments about the fact that the state, or some of these models might be behind the private sector, which may not necessarily be the case. We just don't know, right, from some of these countries. So what would be the plan to deal with that situation when somebody actually comes up with something that moves the needle economically? Why would they share that with anyone, right? So how would we look at that?
Thank you for your insightful reflections. My name is Arjun Chavla. I work in AI and financial crime for HSBC. My question is around the idea of diffusion, which you mentioned a few times in your talk. And while inevitably you need diffusion for any kind of efficiency to be unlocked at scale with AI, the problem inevitably, I imagine, is dependency, right? When you have a monopoly over the code, the technology, and the algorithms behind the LLMs in the US and China. So I was wondering, in your conversations with developing countries as part of the panel, is there a hesitance towards going full on, so going all in on diffusion, because it's an environment of geopolitical fracture? Everyone's trying to de-risk at a time when dependency is being exploited and being weaponized. And just wondering how those conversations go when you try to talk to them about more diffusion. Thanks.
Thanks. Thank you for those questions. I think I'll start with the last one. Look, open source has been around for a while. We're still grappling with what's the right understanding of open source in the AI context. It's just open model weights. It's opening up the data sets you use for training or more. So there is, every year we host an open source week. It's been the third year. This year we'll have a full day looking at open source AI. I think diffusion is hard to stop given the nature of this technology, given the multitude of people working on this. It's unlike the nuclear domain. You had not only that the public sector was the dominant researcher in a sense, but the number of people were very limited and the pathways were also very limited. In this case, you have multiple pathways and you are in a kind of a transition because large language models can sometimes blind us to all of the types of AI pathways that, as you probably know, as an AI startup founder. So I think diffusion would be there with us and open source would facilitate that. And also, you see, the companies themselves who are competing, and this goes back to the previous question, there is an incentive in diffusing some of these models because it allows more people to get their hands on them and use that adaptation of those models as a competitive advantage. Take China's approach to open source as well. And I would see, looking at these two questions, I would see more scope for agency if you're serious about this. Even in Vietnam, which is one of, in Southeast Asia, is a leading country. So, you see this sense of agency that we can develop contextual models in the Vietnamese language and they can, sit on the edge devices and solve some specific problems. So in your case, it'll be very difficult to turn over sensitive financial data, fraud-related data, just into these LLMs. So you will tend to develop those small language models or use LLMs at one layer in a kind of stack-like approach and more proprietary models. And so it's this mix and match of approaches that is going to be key for avoiding some of the issues that you mentioned. The regulatory question, a few set the rules. I think that risk is there, very much there, Professor. But I think today there is again, almost like this, competing vectors on regulation, which is opening up the space. There is a kind of a layer of international learning on data protection and governance where there is less contestation. So you see, common patterns emerging. And in the AI space, we will see that happen. And we are going to be working on that at the UN, through a new AI governance for humanity lab in Valencia, looking at those patterns, extracting the taxonomy, building common understanding over time of, for example, what does safety mean, AI safety mean in Beijing compared with, in Delhi or in Washington, DC. It's going to be a challenge, but I think we can use this challenge as an opportunity to be more nimble about governance at this early stage of the development of this powerful technology and come to more of a building block-like approach, which can be adapted in different contexts.
Okay, second round.
Rami Chabra, I want to know from you that internet, which is what provides the data, is today acknowledged to be anything from 1/3 to 2/3 of pornography. Is this an issue that you are addressing directly or glossing over under the umbrella of risk and talking about social media and the binaries of children and adults? Um, because what this is doing is interfering at the most fundamental, intimate level of human relationships. And it has already shown the tremendous negative societal, sociological effects with increased criminalization of women and children, and the trafficking, rape, you name it, all kinds of problems, which are being shrugged away from being the nexus from being recognized, because we have the First Amendment governing the principles of freedom of speech, and pornography has got conflated with freedom of speech. So is this something that is bothering those of you that are looking at risks today, and will you bring it up front?
Okay. Yes, please.
So my name is Dr. Juneja. I want to know, does the SMEs have to play some role in artificial intelligence? Thank you, sir.
Yes, please.
So this is Jitin. I run a startup. As we proliferate as Indian startups and go global, we face the choice between choosing between different blocks. You know, there's this China block, which is using models like DeepSeek, etc., and then there's the US model, where all these closed source companies as well as some open source is being leveraged. So as Indian startups start to proliferate and create more value and impact on the application layer across the globe, these choices are very important for us. So what is your guidance, or what is your view on multilateralism in terms of which block to be choosing, or what path to be taken by these startups as you grow?
Just to add to this last question, I think we were privately talking about, the different paths that China and the US seem to be taking. When I was in Shanghai recently, one of the points of difference that was mentioned to me was that while the US is going in for proprietary, outcomes, China is going in for, open source models. Because they believe that at every stage of development, the greater the diffusion, there will be greater productivity gains, greater profitability, and that itself, in terms of making the entire economy much more productive, serves a better, purpose in a sense. On the US side, according to the Chinese, I'm not mentioning to you what the Americans have been saying, but the Chinese believe that the Americans are going in for what they regard as, the ultimate silver bullet or the holy grail, that you put in huge sums of money in further and further research and development with the expectation that you will reach what they call some kind of a, artificial super intelligence, which will then give them the instrument to virtually, dominate all different domains. And when that happens, US power will be, paramount in a sense. So there are these two very different directions in which they see AI going forward. So in a sense, it links up to the question that has been asked. If we have to make a choice in terms of which way we should be going, what should be the choice for us? Yeah.
Maybe an important question on porn. So we've been very clear. I mean, the Secretary General himself, And in our interventions, like at the Commission on the Status of Women, this was an issue already 3 years ago. So we've been very clear about this. There's a risk, there's a danger that, in fact, thousands of years of civilized behavior that we've, as humanity, as we've got together in terms of respectful relationships, relationships with their ups and downs, within society. You could have a situation in which, people turn away from that synthetic relationships and kind of a demeaning, debasing of the human, regardless of gender. So I think these kind of second order, third order consequences, hopefully we'll continue to shed light on them and hopefully continue to relate them to the norms we have, including legally binding conventions like CEDAW that have been negotiated. The private sector has tremendous incentives, financial incentives to, because it's a huge industry, by the way. We have to kind of, bend the arc of investments by turning investments more in the direction of the sustainable development goals, solving real societal problems rather than creating more addiction online. The choice, I mean, it's not for us at the UN to say, choices to be exercised by companies, but look at what's happening on the ground. Even US companies, Airbnb, for example, they're using a mix of models. For some things, they use open source models from China. Other things, they use, models from the Bay Area. Some other things, they have their own models. So I think people will make pragmatic choices in their own context. And I would say, you would also be making those pragmatic choices in your own context. So this thing at a larger level, in terms of the strategic approach that's being taken to AI development, I guess the Chinese are good students of history, because historically, if you look at general purpose technologies, it's the diffusion side, the application side that has mattered. And also, you work with your own competitive advantages. So if you have a very broad-based digital economy with depth, then you have a new layer that's coming in. You would try and get the early benefits from that new layer by linking it to that deep and diverse digital economy that you have, while also running the other race, which is that there may be some silver bullets, not a single silver bullet, but there may be silver bullets. And in the Silicon Valley, I don't know if it's a strategic approach, it's the culture. It's the Uber financialization of the system, where the VC companies are looking for multiple X returns. So for them, if you can somehow bypass all this diffusion, which is like patient creation of wealth and nurturing of opportunities, to something that suddenly changes the game for everyone, and you go 100x, 1000x, a million X on your investment. So it's the culture there. So I think other countries will have to look at their own strengths, will have to look at their own culture in terms of how the private sector responds to these challenges. And there are pitfalls to avoid, including an excessive kind of a public sector driven approach to this technology, because we have some lessons from the past and we get locked into those learnings, whether it's the space sector or the nuclear sector, where that kind of a role was essential in some ways. But in this case, it is a different kind of orchestration of scientific capacity across universities, but also universities connecting with real world situations, like working with hospitals, for example, or farmers on the ground, and then linking back to startups, as is already happening, and the government focusing more on facilitating access to compute and facilitating access to data, and skilling support, working with the private sector to do reskilling and talent development. So everyone will have to make their choices in their own context.
So what in your view would be the path that could be followed by India most, usefully?
So I want to say this with humility, even though I'm an Indian, because so I think there is this foundation of digital public infrastructure, Aadhaar, UPI, the data exchange layer. So that gives you scale in terms of data flows in certain sectors of the economy. So if this can be extended to other areas of data flows, data coming together for AI related use, I think that would be a good path to follow. And then the sheer variety of use cases. So I think diffusion makes a lot of sense in the Indian context, given the variety of use cases, the challenges of agriculture productivity, logistics, I mentioned, warehouses, and our e-commerce, whether you take Blinkit or, that domain is again, it's trying to work around some of the like challenges in daily life. So I think that would be a useful path to follow. There is no getting away from investments in deep tech. There's no getting away from like investments in foundational research in AI. It's too important to be left just to these kind of diffusion use cases. And so the wrong lesson should not be drawn from what's happening in China or the US. So I think that too needs to be, sometimes you take the easy path and forget the hard work that's needed to, and including in terms of talent development. You have extraordinary talent in India. For example, the Google team in Bangalore, it's really at the cutting edge of what's happening with the Gemini models, So some of the kind of breakthrough research in terms of the development of those models has been catalyzed by the team in Bangalore. So I think that side of the AI development should not be lost sight of.
Okay, last round. Yeah, I'll come to you.
Amandeep, thank you for this very interesting presentation. And I know I'll have the opportunity to chat with you later, but I wanted to ask for the benefit of this discussion. Looking at the positive aspects of artificial intelligence, interoperability at the multilateral level, I want to address the risk part of it, the security part of it. I'm glad that there's going to be the global digital compact, and there's going to be the meeting this year and the next year, and so it's going to be a structured kind of a conversation and dialogue which is well represented. But I wanted to ask you if in the UN, is there a thought on some kind of an international monitoring agency, something like the Atomic Energy Agency or the UN Security Council, or some sort of a body that's going to be equipped to monitor artificial intelligence use or programs or checking? Or is it going to be possible at all? Are you optimistic about that? And is it on the horizon?
Okay. Yes, please. You had wanted to speak? Yeah.
Greetings, Your Excellency. I'm Amandeep Jain. I've also met you before. I work for the UN Human Rights Office, and we have touched upon sustainable development, and we have touched upon human rights a little bit. And my question actually, ma'am kindly also touched upon the idea of peace and security. So because of the nature of the technology itself, and you have already said that earlier in terms of nuclear technology, it was only in the domain of the public or for the governments. Now we have these other actors, which are the private actors, which are much more powerful than the government itself. And in the time where multilateralism is so fractured, and the geopolitical divide, which was already there without the technology itself, now that the private players are entering the domain of military using AI for those purposes, how do and there's an arms race that has started. The countries which do not want to enter this arms race and only want to use it for human rights and sustainable development purposes, how do they shield or protect themselves from entering this race? And because we are not seeking war, but we also have to be prepared for it if it comes to us.
Okay. Yeah, last question.
Thank you, sir. My name is Yogendra Kumar. I'd read that the UN Secretary General's, the UN Secretariat actually has a task force, or it was envisaged to be a task force, about the existential risk side of artificial intelligence. So my question really is this: what is the capacity of the United Nations Secretariat or its talent pool, technology pool, to actually monitor that aspect of, let's say, the spread of artificial intelligence in our world? So
it's about the same question. Yeah. Okay.
On the risk side, my colleague Aika Suzuki is here. So, she leads a team that looks at risks broadly. There's a global risk report that we come out with every year, but we don't kind of classify this as existential risks. And there was another question around risk. So when the high-level advisory body on AI considered this, they had two options. One is to draw up a list of risks, that today. So they decided not to do it because, you could never finish that task, So they decided, okay, let's look at it from the perspective of vulnerability, which kind of rhymes better with our approach at our, dilemmas at the UN. So who's most vulnerable? Women and children, or, the planet, the threats to. So, and within that then you adopt a kind of a vulnerability lens to risk. And we also decided not to kind of segment it in terms of, very long-term risks and, so taking a more comprehensive approach also in terms of the time horizon from short-term to medium-term risks like shifts in the job markets and so on. I would say the panel would be the right place for this to be considered on a regular basis. If there are some existential risks that are coming around the bend, then it, as the SG has said, it becomes a kind of the world's early warning system. The IEA agency monitoring question. So again, for now we have the panel. This issue was considered by the high-level advisory body on AI, which decided at the end not to recommend it. Keep this under watch. And at some stage, if the world needs to kind of come together to address this through more robust measures, then, you could consider something specific like, monitoring. Because I doubt today, if you'd succeed with that kind of an approach. I think what's important to focus on now is transparency, access, developing the right metrics of evaluation, because, some of these benchmarks are kind of just, the AI racing car is just crashing through them. So what are real metrics that we need? And then also a degree of kind of assessment of some of these implications that you see, in the public domain, but also some, more deep bibliometric analysis of incidents in a sense. And in the academic sector, some of this work is already underway.
Okay. Sorry, you have been very, very patient with all the questions that have been thrown at you. Thank you very much for really, in a sense, throwing light on something which is both exhilarating in its prospects, but also rather daunting in terms of its risks. And how to navigate this in the right way is probably going to be one of the greatest challenges of our time, I would say. To end with just one observation, I just read that, the brains of a large number of people across the spectrum over the last 10 years or so has been sort of mapped. And as the use of AI increases, the various parts of the brain which are, are actually aware of what is happening around, ability to compute, ability to think, all that seems to be declining. So there is a sort of a very rapid growth taking place here with artificial intelligence. But are we going to end up finally as a kind of a humanity which is mainly made of zombies.
So humanity ends not with a bang, but with a whimper.
With a whimper. Okay, on that note, thank you very much for coming today. And thank you very much, Amandeep, for your. Thank you. Thank you.